All right, I have a wonderful slide presentation. However, I'm losing my voice because I've been taken out of my original position as a team lead for cybersecurity incident response for industrial control systems to be on the speaking circuit. And as you can see, I haven't fully adapted yet. I have the slides, and these are welcome to be taken with you, Sid. These are TLP white. So in the DHS environment, we have what's known as the traffic light protocol. Red, yellow, green, and white means everybody can consume it. Red and yellow limit the ability of people to use it. And then, of course, green is open for everybody within our field, and you can share it within our field, basically. In this case, I felt that it was prudent, especially based on what Sid has already said, that I changed my format a little bit here, and I may flick through some of the slides, but mostly I'm gonna read something to you because I feel like this is really important, and we've seen way too much of it lately. So let's go right into the ransomware that Sid was talking about. A strain of commodity ransomware compromised assets on a natural gas pipeline facility's operational technology network. While the threat actor did not directly impact physical process control, so the production line itself was unaffected. Okay, I want to be clear on that. The incident resulted in a partial loss of view of operations at the facility. And for those of you who run any type of production line, if you can't view it, as Sid said, can you safely keep it running? I don't think so. Okay, so the loss of view prompted the operators to initiate a deliberate and controlled shutdown of the affected facility, which necessitated operational shutdowns at additional pipeline facilities and temporarily halted natural gas flow through the pipeline. How serious is that? Well, depends on how many clients it services, right? And if there's redundancies in place. So pipeline operators should implement a cyber maintenance program incorporating recommended technical and architectural controls to reduce the risk posed by ransomware. Pipeline operators should also craft emergency response plans that consider the range of potential impact posed by cyber attacks. And that's the crucial one for this particular entity. They did have in their emergency response plans to consider cyber, but they had never tested it. So this being a pipeline and with high pressures involved, if you lose visibility on something like that, you just can't. Regulatory requirements say you must shut it down. So they did what they were required to do to avoid anybody getting hurt. We're seeing a lot of that lately. I've been on probably last year 3 or 4 different engagements specifically with manufacturers and utilities, and we're seeing a lot of cases of ransomware. And of course, DHS's position is don't pay. You're just encouraging the behavior. But several of the entities we went to, we know they paid. And although we advised against it, in those cases, even their backups were encrypted because their backups weren't segmented off on another part of the network, or they didn't use off-site backups, which we encourage as part of our, if you go to the US CERT website, there's a paper out there, 7 steps to securing IT, OT networks. And they're really logical steps. It breaks it down for you. It's basically just a white paper. Everybody's welcome to use it. But it goes through some of the requirements that you should consider for your OT systems. Because as Sid said, these things I can go on Shodan right now if I had access to a computer up here, and I could do a search and query and show you how many of these HMIs are broadcasting out to the open wide internet. And you can even see the HMI interface that operators are supposed to click on to change functions in the production line. You can't allow that. You just can't. There's too many products out there that are freeware. You don't even have to pay for these services. You can go on Metasploit, and a lot of the scripts that we call them script kiddies, but they're so simple. You can just download it, make a couple of real quick little minor modifications in the code, and you can run it on any platform that you have exposure to. So it's out there, it's available, it's easily available, and everyone needs to be aware. So a lot of municipalities are having difficulty with this. As you've seen in the news, the ransomware shuts down mostly the business side. We do know that they have the capability to affect safety systems because of Triton and Hatman viruses and the APTs that were behind that. And what they did is they actually modified the code of safety systems in a production line so that the line would not tell the operators that it's in an overpressure situation, thereby causing a possible explosion and death to personnel. Luckily, that didn't happen. It was caught, it was fixed, but that was inserted into the software that the device itself utilizes. So unfortunately, ICS environments are often exposed to the same threats. I went to a remote fracking site out in, God forbid, someplace dry and very remote. and we could see, before we ever got there, we could see the broadcasts on Shodan. I mean, and then they wondered how they got hit. Well, you're wide open, you're broadcasting. So it's, you need to have your people check the settings. If you have a setting that comes as a default on a device, don't just let it sit like that. Change it, lock it out. If you're not using it, if you're not actively using it for the production line, shut it out, turn it off, and then turn the key so that it can't be changed unless somebody physically goes out. And I realize that's inconvenient, right? I mean, today's day and age, we're looking for convenience to minimize our manning requirements. And this is all across the spectrum, because as it said, you need professionals. You really need people that are trained. And when I say trained, you can't just hire somebody as an OT specialist, OT cyber specialist. Typically, your key specialist will have had a lot of experience on the IT side first, because a lot of the devices that are being incorporated are quasi-IT. A lot of the old RTUs had Windows XP and other limited Windows environments, and those particular devices are easily, as you well know, have a lot of vulnerabilities, and everybody knows it's difficult to patch a production line because you can't take it down regularly unless you have a redundant line that you can switch to maintain your revenues. So it's very difficult to patch these devices. So you've got to really plan this before you add another component that sends back a meter reading. Make sure that component, everything that needs to be turned off, is turned off. And then you can go ahead and test it. Again, test it first, please. Internal practices, that's everybody is aware of that. That's the part in SIDS, in the orange part on SID's slide, there's only one thing I would add, and that would be to test. Okay, after you draft your cybersecurity incident response plan, test it. And when I say test it, I mean minimum once annually, preferably every 6 months. In this particular case with this pipeline, they had it written in there that should there be a cyber attack, talk to the IT people. But they'd never tested it. They didn't know what to do in the case of an actual cyber incident. So they were they faltered, and obviously they ended up getting owned, which was a shame. But they didn't pay. I want to be clear, they did not pay the ransom. This is true. A couple of years ago, there were still some RTUs out there with XP. I know in the utility industry, I came from, DHS stole me from DOE. I knew Chris Krebs back then too. I'm not on his level, obviously. But back then, they still had some RTUs, which is a type of IT/OT device that controls relays and other devices back behind it, giving you a level of visibility above basic relays and other input-output devices on your production network. Problem is, obviously, XP was wide open. Configure, it's funny that that's listed. We know of several sites that have segregated systems where Configure is running on that system, but they can't shut it down. They can't. It's just, and it can't get out because it's a completely enclosed network. Now, we've had some articles recently in the past in the news you may have seen where they've learned how to breach the air gap, right? And there's a number of different ways that can be done. Several of the analysts that we have at DHS were previous NSA, and they've enlightened us. So there are ways to get around that. Used to be attacks on infrastructure, you didn't really see it that much because you had security by obscurity, right? Nobody knew the systems were even out there. But with Shodan and a bunch of other web crawler services that basically just go out there and look, and you can ask any of your IT firewall folks, they'll tell you they see this stuff hitting the networks all the time, the web crawlers. It's benign. It's standard for the internet. If you have a device touching the internet, there's some device somewhere else in the world that wants to catalog that and keep a record of it for historical purposes. So just be aware that that's always going on. As I said, Hatman Triton, it compromised a safety system and took full control of that safety system. So you could have had an actual human death situation from a cyber attack had they not caught that. Luckily, they did. IoT, everything's getting smarter. You know, my fridge wants to talk to the internet and go on a date, you know, using a dating website with my toaster. It's the craziest stuff I've ever seen. But, you know, everything out there seems like everybody wants to add that little, okay, let's make it so you can control it from your phone. Oh, that's great, yeah. Until somebody turns on your microwave while you're at work because it's wide open to the internet and it blows up in your kitchen and nobody's home. So, you know, we need to think sometimes about what we're putting into products. Some devices have no business being on the internet, folks. And we need to drive that as a business community. We need to drive that not everything needs to touch the internet, okay? Sorry, let me back that up. I like this. Who is responsible for its security? All of us are, especially leadership here in this room. You guys have your finger on the dollar button. You've got to put the money and invest. I've seen some extremely mature SOCs out there in some of these corporations. So some of you are doing a fantastic job. We didn't even have to open our specialty cases. We were able to use the tools at the site, and I was able to send my kid off to another team at another site in the midst of a very large campaign year before last, I'm sorry. And y'all probably saw that one on the news too that had to do with power utilities. We're all responsible, and some people are implementing it better than others. I understand dollars are an item. Pay for the best professional that you can, and then let them give you proper guidance on how to build up your systems. And that's all I can say on that, I guess. Attacks via third party. This was like the #1 avenue that we saw being utilized across the spectrum was you have a very large manufacturer, their security's in place, two-factor authentication, whitelisting, everything. They're doing everything they're supposed to do to minimize contact, role-based duties, locking out everything that doesn't need to be open. However, they have a third-party vendor that they have a trust that they've established, been working with this vendor for 3 or 4 years. That vendor may only have single-factor authentication, and in many cases that we responded to, this was the case. And then the phishing originated from them. Now, thankfully, in most cases, they didn't actually have a login account to the entity, but since the trust was there and the work between partners had already been established, the entity got phished and the right people, and then, of course, the incident happened. So know what your third-party vendors, how they deal with their own cybersecurity. That will tell you a boatload about how good of a product that they're really offering you. And if you're a small business, I understand dollars are prime, but get your people trained. This is way too important, and you don't want your insurance liability to be tapped for its maximum amount because the person you were supporting got hacked because of your people. I'm not sure how the whole insurance industry is going to do all that, but I'll let somebody smarter than me talk about that. Phishing is the number one access. We've seen it over and over again, and they're getting smarter and smarter with this. And how do you train against phishing? You just have to send constant reminders to people. If it's not from your network, vet it. Don't open attachments. Scan them first. If you're unsure, notify your IT community and say, hey, can you guys scan this attachment for me? I don't know who this is that sent it to me. How did I get this? Those kind of things. And also, it doesn't hurt. I know everybody's very busy, okay? It's not that difficult to click on the header and see where it's coming from also. And if something looks out of the ordinary, question it. My goodness, question it. 0-day vulnerabilities, okay. You don't know they're there. They're 0 days, okay? However, like the Citrix one that we just put out AAR on, which is an alert, okay? If you go out to US CERT website, and this is open to everybody nationwide, really worldwide. We help even governments from other countries. The 0-day, the Citrix one that we just put out, it's very important. If you have a Windows device, there's a very good chance that you're vulnerable and that you need to close this. When you find that something has been notified that there's a problem out there, do your best to patch it as quickly as possible. If we've put it out there publicly, that means it's already been in the wild a minimum of 2 to 4 weeks, okay? So we have to cross all our T's, just like y'all do. Before we put something out, it has to meet certain requirements, certain guidelines, and this hampers us from just throwing something out there as soon as it's identified by an analyst. Now, luckily, we have several programs where we've turned quasi-black hat investigators into white hat because now they can get a reward for finding these. And it legitimizes their skills. It's a reward program. They tell them to us, we contact the company, and we work it out. Because a lot of times the companies did not want to talk to an analyst saying, you have no right probing our software. If your software is out there on the internet, yeah, they may not have a license to it, but they still have access to it. And these people are trying to find the holes that your IT people don't have time to sit around all day and look for because they're too busy going through the millions of logs that are created every day by all these IT devices. I've been one of those ones that had to go through those logs. Our requirement was 5% had to be reviewed monthly. 5% of the logs. Now, does that mean I'm going to miss some stuff? Yes. When I did it, we didn't have all the wonderful third-party software that they have nowadays that can scan the logs very quickly, looking for very specific stuff. So 5% was really good if we could even manage that, and there's a lot of logs. But nowadays, it's a lot easier to do that. There's software out there to help you. So I'm going to go through a lot of these real quickly here. Communication is important. Don't let people hide your data. I understand. DHS has a program that if you ask us to come out and help you, we have something called PCII, Protected Critical Information, Industrial Security Information. So if you invite us on site and you invoke PCII, that's not getting out, folks. We don't tell anybody. You have to tell people. If you have a regulatory requirement, we're not going to do anything about that. That's your responsibility to do your regulatory notifications. We're going to come help you mitigate as quickly and as efficiently as we can, if we can. If it's ransomware, folks, you know what our response is? Can we have a copy? Thank you. Have a nice day. There's nothing we can do for ransomware. That's going to be on you and your backups and any third-party entities that you may bring into play to help rebuild the systems. And we've seen that a lot, okay? The companies that didn't have complete separation of their backups and off-site backup. But now we're seeing cases where the ransomware agents are being put in maybe, 6, 7 months, then they sit quietly on your network with just every now and then a beacon, stay alive beacon comes out. Every now and then, very unobtrusive. You're probably using harvested credentials, so you're not even going to notice it because it's going to look like legitimate traffic. And then they wait. and then they hit with the ransomware. By then, all of your backups, a lot of people don't keep more than 6 months back. So even those 6 months that you reload, guess what? You just put them right back on there. The off-site backup is critical. You really should have a way to do. And in the Air Force, I spent 22 years in combat comm with the Air Force. And what we did, we had, you would take turns being a tape ape. That's what we called the people that hauled the tapes, the big magnetic tapes around. And we had lock boxes, and we would constantly back up, put the tapes in a safe location, and transfer them to an off-site location. Obviously, there's much better ways to do backups now. You don't have to use magnetic tapes, but the same thing kind of follows. If you have a way of storing backups at another location, completely segmented away from the rest of your business network and everything else, and then test them, folks. Test those backups. It's not good enough just to say, yeah, I've got 5 terabytes of backed up, OT, IT, everything. Great. Will it work? Have you had a chance to test it? I mean, you don't know, and you don't want it to be that day to find out. That pipeline lost $15 million a day. How does that hit your bottom line? Feels good? Yeah, probably not. And I don't think AFLAC covers that. Really, I don't. So, I mean, the duck died. So we see a lot of exfiltration anymore. They are studying. And the reason they take 6 months a lot of times is they've harvested legitimate credentials, and they're sitting there and they're watching and they're learning. They're learning how to manipulate these OT systems because they're not standard and they take a special practice. But anybody can sign up for a SANS course, right? I don't think you get vetted for your security clearance to go to a SANS course. Well, you can learn this stuff. Yeah, they're not cheap. Most of the hackers want to get it for free, but they are very, very intuitive courses. I mean, I'm not throwing a SANS advertisement out there at all. I'm just saying that those are the courses that they can learn. That's one source of the courses. There's a lot of compromises. We found people in an actor in one of our dams. Luckily, the dam, the production network was offline from this new HMI interface, but it got owned, and the interface did. But because the actual dam operation network itself was already turned off, the actor could not open the flow valves of the dam. But they were in there and lurking and learning. So investigate. These are all Ukraine. I'm sure you guys are aware of that. We're still assisting Ukraine. Regardless of what you hear on the news, we are still attempting to help them. You got to understand, Ukraine is the playground for Big Brother, right? Just like, I guess in Asia, Taiwan is the playground for China, right? They're always at each other's throats trying to have their way, I guess. I don't know. Politics escape me sometimes. But yeah, in Ukraine, you have the Soviet Union, which didn't want them to separate, so they're constantly putting pressure on them to come back. And we helped them. We sent a team over to help them. And the only thing that saved them was because their systems were still a lot older, they had the manning and the manpower to send someone out to each of these substations and manually trip and activate relays, which is why it was such a quick restoral on their part. Now, the HMIs that got infected, those were bricked. They were turned into an actual brick because they uploaded something that was not compatible, and even the manufacturers couldn't recover those devices. But because they had the manning to still send somebody out, they were able to bring it back up. I think it was like a couple of hours. But that's not the case here in the U.S. When I was with DOE, the entity that I was working with had 572 sites across 11 states, and some of them were extremely remote. One of them, I think you could only reach by helicopter. So obviously, you're not going to have the manning for something like that to go put somebody at every particular junction. So Black energy was used in 2015. Crash override framework was used in 2016. Poor Ukraine. They've had their fill of it. So it was attributed as Russian activity in the news and everything. So we're allowed to state that as well. This is an important graph because it goes back to what I was telling you about the third-party vendors on the outside ring. They were infiltrated first, and by utilizing those contacts, they were able to get much closer to what they were actually wanting to get to, which was internal utilities in the power sector, some of which may or may not control nuclear sites. I can neither confirm nor deny that happened. So Triton Trice's Hat Man, again, we talked about that. This is a pretty little spin wheel, but application whitelisting is the number one best thing that you can do for an OT environment. If it doesn't need to be running it, block it. Another entity was using geo-blocking very effectively. That's great. If your network has no reason to talk to Israel or Lebanon or China, block it. It doesn't need it. So whitelist it, geo-block it, get you good cybersecurity specialists, get good third-party software reviewing those logs regularly. This is critical. Reduce your attack surface, segment. You gotta segment. You can't have a flat network, people. It's absolutely segment it as much as you can without causing yourself too much overhead. And I personally still advocate air gap your production network if you can. I haven't seen anything to change my mind on that yet. I realize that can be bridged, but you know who the main culprit of being able to bridge that is? That's an APT, folks. Can you stop an APT? They have time, they have money, they have resources. Any network is susceptible to any one of these three, okay? So you can't stop an APT. It's not if, it's a when. And there's nothing really that I can tell you to block it entirely because they have the capability to watch and to search for the 0 days and to pump the phishing out there to get some CEO somewhere that felt because it's his company or her company and because they own it, they want to have administrative rights on their personal account. And you guys may think that's funny. Do you think there's a reason I mentioned it? However, he doesn't anymore. He or she does not anymore. Embedded or critical devices, there's a lot of them out there. I'm going to press through a bunch of these. This thing was TLP white, so these slides can be passed out. And that pretty much concludes what I've got. Is there any questions for... Oh, I'm sorry, advanced persistent threat. I apologize. I speak geek sometimes, sorry. Oh, okay, fair enough. Thank you.